In this video you will learn a very solid system for black to play against the queen's gambit. After the moves d4, d5. White can play c4, entering the queen's gambit. White's idea is to eliminate the opponent's central pawn, with the aim of keeping a central pawn majority. Now, the easiest way for black is to play e6, reinforcing the defense of the d5 pawn, in order to keep his pawn in the center. The drawback with this move is that the bishop on c8 can be boxed in. Therefore, black will have to be careful that his bishop does not become passively trapped in by his own pawns. White can play knight c3, developing his queen's knight and increasing the pressure against the d5 point. Black responds knight f6, developing the king's knight and increasing control over the central squares. White can play bishop g5, developing his queen's bishop before making the move e3, so that the bishop can remain active outside his pawn chain. Now white threatens to capture on d5, followed by the capture on f6, which would leave black's pawns on the kingside very weak. For example, if black makes a foolish move like a6, this is a mistake and white can gain an advantage with c takes d5. Now, black cannot capture on d5 with the knight because it is pinned. So he is forced to capture with the pawn. White captures on f6 and forces black to recapture with the pawn, otherwise he would lose the d5 pawn. Black's pawns have become very weak on the kingside and white has an advantage. After the move bishop g5, black can play bishop e7, developing his king's bishop and unpinning the knight on f6 to avoid the opponent's threat. This is the so-called orthodox defense. Black's plan is to first develop his kingside pieces with knight f6, bishop e7 and castling on the short side. Once black has his king safely in place, he can think about how to develop his queenside pieces. Now white can play e3, connecting his pawns and allowing the development of his king's bishop. Black castles. White can play knight f3, developing his king's knight on its natural square. Black plays knight b to d7, developing his queen's knight and reinforcing the defense of the knight on f6. Black's knight will be very well placed on this square, as black prepares to break through the center with c5 to free his position. If white now plays bishop d3, completing the development of his minor pieces and preparing to castle, black can respond by d takes c4, forcing the white bishop to move again. After bishop takes c4, black plays c5, attacking the opponent's pawn center and equalizing the game. Black can continue with moves like a6, b5, bishop b7, etc. and has very good play. After the move knight b to d7, white can play queen c2, delaying the development of the king's bishop for the moment to wait for black to capture on c4. Then white can capture on c4 with the bishop, thereby gaining time in development, as he has managed to get the bishop to the c4 square in one move. The disadvantage of getting the queen to the c2 square is that it no longer defends the d4 point and white exerts less pressure on the d5 point. Therefore, black can immediately react in the center with c5, increasing the tension in the center to free up his position. The game can continue c takes d5. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes e7. Queen takes e7. Knight takes d5. E takes d5. D takes c5. Knight takes c5. Bishop e2, preparing to castle. Bishop e6. A position has been reached where black has an isolated pawn on d5, which could be weak in the endgame. However, this gives black a slight space advantage and greater mobility for his pieces. Black has very good play. After knight b to d7, the best move for white is rook c1, a good waiting move. White delays the development of his king's bishop to try to gain some time in the development. At the same time he places his rook on the c-file, which could be opened in the next moves. For example, it would now be a mistake to b6, with the idea of developing the queen's bishop by fianchetto. since white can play c takes d5, opening the c-file. Now, it would be a mistake to capture on d5 with the knight, to keep the large light square diagonal open. Since white captures on d5. And after e takes d5, white plays bishop takes e7. After queen takes e7. White plays rook takes c7 and wins. And, if after the move c takes d5, black recaptures with the pawn. White can play bishop d3, completing the development of his minor pieces and preparing to castle. The large light square diagonal is blocked. White will be able to exert a lot of pressure and has the advantage. After the move rook to c1, the best response for black is c6, reinforcing the defense of the d5 point and blocking the c-file to nullify the opponent's rook. Black has a very solid position and can make useful waiting moves like a6, h6, rook e8, waiting for white to develop his king's bishop, and then he can capture on c4, to force the enemy bishop to move again and gain some tempo in the development. White can play bishop d3, completing the development of his minor pieces and preparing to castle. Now, black can immediately capture on c4, to force the enemy bishop to move again. Or he can play h6 first, attacking the bishop on g5, to force him to make a decision. Now, it is not good to capture on f6, since black keeps the bishop pair and has very good play. After h6, white can play bishop on h4, to keep his bishop. Black can play d takes c4, to force the white bishop to move again. After bishop takes c4. Black plays a6, preparing the move b5, to expand with his pawns on the queenside, and then he can break in the center with c5, to free his position. The queen bishop can develop on the b7 square, where it will be very well placed and black has very good play. From here we will continue with a masterful game, so you can see the different game plans and how black has a very good game. Now, white castled. Black played b5, expanding with his pawns on the queenside and gaining a tempo by attacking the opponent's bishop. White played bishop d3 to defend his bishop. Black played c5, attacking the opponent's pawn center and freeing up his position. The bishop on c8 is now ready to develop on the b7 square, and black has very good play. Now white played bishop b1, with the idea of continuing with queen d3, to form an attack battery with his queen and bishop ready to invade the opponent's castling and attack the black king for checkmate. Black played bishop b7, completing the development of his minor pieces. White played knight e5, centralizing his knight and allowing the advance with f4, to start the attack on the kingside. Black played rook c8, bringing his queen rook into play and preparing the counterplay on the queenside. White played f4, starting to advance his pawns on the kingside, to attack the opponent's castling. The game continued. C takes d4, eliminating the opponent's central pawn. Now it would not be good to capture on d4 with the queen, since bishop c5 would follow, attacking the white queen. After, for example, queen d2. Black captures on e5 and will be in the advantage. After queen takes d8. Rook f takes d8. F takes e5. Black plays bishop takes e3 check and is winning. In the game, after the move c takes d4, white recaptured on d4 with the pawn. Now black played b4, attacking the opponent's knight. If now white plays knight e2 to defend his knight and reinforce the defense of the d4 pawn. Black can play rook takes c1, exchanging a pair of rooks. After knight takes c1. Black plays rook e8 to defend his bishop and be able to move his queen freely. Then he can continue with moves like queen b6, to start putting pressure on the d4 pawn, and black has the advantage. In the game, after the move b4, white played queen d3, sacrificing the knight in order to attack the enemy king. White's plan is to eliminate the black knights and then invade with his queen on the h7 square and checkmate the black king. However, in his calculations, white did not take into account a small detail that we will see later. The game continued. Beat takes c3, capturing the white knight. White played knight takes d7, eliminating one of the opponent's knights. After queen takes d7. White played bishop takes f6, eliminating the other black knight and leaving the h7 square undefended. This was white's idea. He is threatening to checkmate on h7 and it seems that he will be left with an advantage. However, now black played c2 and white resigned. Since both white bishops are attacked and black will be left with an advantage. For example, in case of bishop takes e7, black captures on b1 promoting to queen. After rook takes b1. Queen takes e7. Black has an extra piece and his advantage is decisive. And in case of bishop takes c2, threatening to checkmate on h7. Black can play rook takes c2, to avoid checkmate. He is threatening to capture on c1. So white has to play rook takes c2. After bishop takes f6. Black has two bishops in exchange for a rook and his advantage is obvious. A very instructive game in which you have been able to learn how to play against the Queen's Gambit and how to get a very good position playing with the black pieces.